Hello, hello, hello. I'm Hojo.
And I'm Hunzi.
And welcome to episode 2 of Hojo and Hunzi's Hard Rock House, the safe space for old Gumbies just like us, where the question of what exactly was down Biff Byford's silver spandex trousers is always uppermost in our thoughts. Hey Hunzi, how you doing?
I've got some views on what was down Biff Byford's silver trousers, but we'll leave that for a later time. I'm good, mate. How are you? I'm good.
Let's start in our usual way by talking about what's been getting us off orally this morning. What have you been listening to, Hunzi?
Well, today I have been listening to what I consider to be one of the most overlooked live albums, Whitesnake's Live in the Heart of the City.
Interesting choice. I am a fan of the Double Live album. So tell me why do you love Double Live so much?
A lot of the classic Double Live albums were recorded prior to me actually going to see those bands live. So it was almost like you were given a hint of what's to come if you ever got to see them live, but you were also tinged with a little bit of disappointment in the fact that you never saw them at that time. So it gives you a jealousy that you go, oh God, I just wish I'd been born a little bit earlier and I would have seen them on that tour. There's plenty of bands who probably should have recorded a Double Live album at their peak, but they never did. The Double Live album, it's everything. The gatefold, the artwork, track listing is always a banging list of all the greatest songs. And Whitesnake's Live in the Heart of the City is exactly that. I always thought David Coverdale was a bit odd that he had a yellow face, but then it took me years to realise that was just a light on his face. I thought maybe he had jaundice. But you know, that Whitesnake album is the pinnacle. There'll be people out there go, oh, what about 1987? That wasn't Whitesnake. It was Marsden, Moody, Murray. That lineup, for me, it's in the top 5 live double albums of all time. And I just want to quantify something here. For a live album to be considered a classic, it has to be a double. So if you want Blood by AC/DC, not included. Sorry, they probably could have done a double, but they never did. So it's not in.
That was brilliantly summed up. There were a lot of points that I want to pick up on from your eulogy for Whitesnake's Live in the Heart of the City. Number one, you're absolutely right. The 70s was the period when the Double Live album reigned supreme. And we just missed that era, didn't we? My first gig was 1979. So I just caught the tail end of the 70s, but really not enough to be part of that whole world where people with patchouli oil and greatcoats and Double Live albums under their arm and bum fluff coming home from school. That was our brother's era, wasn't it? That's how I started listening to rock music, when my brother used to look like that and came home with those kind of records.
Exactly the same for me.
We're agreed that the 70s was the period of the most enjoyable Double Live albums of all time. You're absolutely right. Again, I hate to agree with you on everything, but I do agree with you that the single live album just doesn't cut it next to the Double Live, does it? You're right. AC/DC, no. If You Want Blood, great record, not a double. Can't really be close to your heart as one of the all-time greats. Fog Out Live, another one. A travesty that wasn't a Double Live. Yeah. And there are stories about it. I know that Roger Earl has talked about the fact that it was something to do with the record company, and then there were various tapes in various vaults that I think were released much later, more of a lengthy Double Live CD. Can you have a Double Live CD? You probably can't really, can you? I have to agree with you that the classic Whitesnake lineup has nothing to do with 1987. That's going to cause controv, isn't it? But it's true.
Oh, definitely.
The Whitesnake lineup of people with greasy hair, bad moustaches, I'm with stupid T-shirts was the killer app for me. Didn't get better.
You just put it on back to back. You don't skip a track. That's the great thing about Double Live as well. If they get the track listing right, you don't skip a track.
Question for you. When you were listening to Live in the Heart of the City this morning, verdicts on the lyrics with 40 years to have digested them, what's your feeling?
Are you questioning me on whether the lyrics in certain songs that Whitesnake recorded in the 1970s would be deemed as inappropriate these days?
Well, I'm asking you whether you would deem them as inappropriate. Do you still wholeheartedly feel like that you're a Love Hunter baby, or do your buttocks slightly clench when you hear that kind of stuff these days?
Yes. Post Live in the Heart of the City, I think Messrs. Coverdale and the rest of them, with certain albums, probably pushed it a little bit too far with artwork. Can you imagine Slide It In being deemed as a record that would get much airplay these days? Or, they even did a song called Spit It Out. I mean, it's like, slide it in and then spit it out. Love Hunter is someone who is looking for love, isn't it? Certainly at the time, I didn't think anything of it. I've gone beyond that point. I don't really think about that. I just love the music. And yes, it might be inappropriate in some ways, but the music is the key thing here.
Okay, so what I think I'm hearing here from you, Hunzi, is what's wrong with being sexy?
Yes, and they were a sexy band. Yeah,
Mickey Moody would be delighted to have been called sexy.
But of course, you know what my favourite moment on that record is. Coverdale's performance is extraordinary. We all know he can sing, right? I mean, the guy's pipes were incredible at that point. You mentioned Love Hunter, and our favourite point on that album is the intro to Love Hunter.
Remind us how it goes.
Well, I can't do it word for word, but he does it in his dulcet Teesside accent of this is the title track from our new album, and he just talks. He's talking to the audience, giving them a nice intro about what song the band are about to play. So he goes, "Oh, this is the opening track of our new album," and it's called Love Hunter. There's no need for that. Just say, "Look, this is called Love Hunter." You don't need to do that screeching. Anyway, it always makes me laugh because I just feel as if he could just go, "This is called Love Hunter." Maybe he was trying to wake the crowd up because they weren't being very responsive. Yeah,
that's not true because they had the choir, didn't they? On Ain't No Loving Hot City, the choir.
Oh yes, the choir. The choir. Yeah.
It was a great record. So, if you haven't listened to that one in a while, you've got Hunzi to thank for drawing your attention to it, so go back and have a listen to it now. I'm going to tell you about the album I've been listening to this morning. Right. But funnily enough, it does have a Whitesnake connection, and I'm surprised that this is what I was listening to this morning. I'll explain why. The album I've been listening to is a Deep Purple album, and I bet you in a million years you'll never guess which one it is.
Come Taste the Band.
No.
Stormbringer.
No.
Burn. No.
See, you'll just carry on and on. You'll never guess. I've been listening to Slaves and Masters. Remember Slaves and Masters?
Oh yes, I do actually. Yes, I remember my brother having a copy of that. Connoisseur's choice. It's
completely ignored by most Deep Purple fans, isn't it? Came out in 1990. Not a great time for traditional rock. Obviously, we're on the cusp of grunge. Hair metal has dominated through the late period of the 80s. So a kind of a traditional rock band like Deep Purple were not on what you call the upward curve. But Slaves and Masters is a surprisingly good album. And I'm going to tell you why I know this is not because I play it religiously. I probably haven't played it in 20 years. But I was researching a piece about going to see Purple in Hamburg in Germany in 1991. And I was sent out to cover it for a cover story for Kerrang! Interesting aside is that the cover line for the issue was a split cover with Purple and Saxon. And the headline was, "Can Old Codgers Still Cut It?" And this is in 1990.
Bloody hell. Wasn't Joe Lynn Turner the singer on this record?
You're absolutely right. So Joe Lynn Turner's the singer, and the story that I wrote, I was reading it back while I was researching this article, and it was quite funny because I'd flown to Hamburg, and the record label was BMG, and the band had just signed to BMG, and I think they were quite excited about having a kind of a heritage rock act on the label. And they promised me Ritchie Blackmore for interview, and of course, as you'll very well know, Ritchie Blackmore was a difficult man at the best of times, so there was never really any guarantee that when something was set up with Ritchie that he would actually come through and do the interview. So I wrote a lot about lots of people from BMG running around being very kind of nervous about whether they were actually going to get Blackmore. And Blackmore presumably was up in his hotel room laughing his head off about the fact that all these people were running around getting very nervous about whether he would or wouldn't do the interview. And of course, in the end, he decided he wasn't going to do the interview, which in the piece I wrote, I didn't really care either way, because if he didn't turn up to do the interview, it's a good story, isn't it? So even at the time, I was like, if he turns up, fine. If he doesn't, I'm not asked. So in the end, I got Joe Lynn Turner. And Joe Lynn Turner was incredibly spiky. Not with me. He was good with me, but he was very, very punchy about Deep Purple fans. They're only interested in the old shit. We've made a really great record here. People should be listening to it. Talking about relations in the band. Oh, well, it doesn't matter whether we're mates, so long as we're good on stage, which we are, etc., etc. So it was a really interesting interview. But what I was doing was I went back to listen to Slaves and Masters to do proper research and decide whether I was just going, I'll say something nice about the new album so that I can get a free trip to Hamburg. And actually, I was really surprised. The album's very good. It's a really interesting mix of early Purple stuff from the classic era, the 70 to 75 era. Lots of very muso-y passages, really great playing. John Lord was still very keen on the organ and the moog and all those old sounds. And then mixing in with that was everything that Blackmore and Jolene Turner had done in Rainbow when they decided they wanted to try and break America and went a bit foreigner-esque, and a lot of people hated him for it. And I actually thought it had some good moments. So Slaves and Masters is a really interesting mix of those two styles. But there are 2 or 3 tracks like The Cut Runs Deep and Fire in the Basement and King of Dreams that are actually really good and could stand up with the best of Purple's catalogue. But because it came out at that weird time, it's just totally lost in the mist of history, isn't it? Nobody talks about Slaves and Masters. Nobody's going to go, oh, what a great song that was. What a great album that was. A tip to you, when you get 5 minutes later in the day, play a couple of tracks off it. And I think you'll be surprised.
I'm just reading about it now. It peaked at number 87 on the US Billboard charts.
Yeah, peaked.
Peaked. Yeah, that's a hell of a peak. The one before that was The House of the Blue Light. That was well received. It was the last album they did with Gillan before he got sacked and Jolene Turner came in, and then he went and did whatever he did, and then he came back. Because House of Blue Light was a pretty good record.
Well, funnily enough, in that original piece, I was writing that it had been very badly received and actually got a bit of a slating as not all that. So I don't know. Really? I don't know if you've got a false memory there.
Someone lent me a cassette of it, and I thought it was decent.
Maybe you just got bad taste in music.
I'm going to listen to Slave and Masters today on your recommendation, and I will drop you a note about what I think about it.
Report back to teacher.
I always liked Jolene Turner. The stuff he did with Rainbow was good. Yes, they were trying to break the US market, but those albums he did with Rainbow I thought were decent, and I like him as a singer. I always liked his wigs, but apparently
I was going to ask about the wigs thing. It was very interesting, wasn't it, that in his last solo album came out 2022 and it's called Belly of the Beast, and I interviewed him at the time, and he was on this big trip about how he didn't care about the fact that people knew he wore a wig anymore, and he'd had some photos done bald and some photos done with a wig on. I didn't really know what to think about that. I thought on the one hand it was very brave, and on one hand I thought, why put the wig back on? Why don't you just go out bald?
That's what you'd normally do, wouldn't you, really? Paul Quinn from Saxon didn't do that, did he?
Paul Quinn from Saxon was very much in the wig camp, wasn't he? So anyway, there you go. But we really need to move on because we've gas-banged about what we've been listening to. But isn't that the pleasure of Hojo and Hunsy's Hard Rock House, that you just get to do whatever the fuck you want? Anyway, look, you need to get back to the last episode's cliffhanger, because we left anyone who was listening, our single figures numbers listeners, on tenterhooks about the band. Well, we didn't mention the band, did we? We said, why was a heavy metal band wearing a T-shirt with the immortal phrase, Howard Johnson sucks dick on it?
Yes, exactly. We left that hanging, didn't we? Are we going to tell them? Are we going to tell people now?
Yeah, it's the big reveal. Do you remember this incident, Hunsy, or is this just something that I've told you about down the years?
I've got to be honest, I don't actually remember seeing it visualised in a magazine. I'm only aware of it because you told me about it.
Okay, well, let me tell our single-finger listeners about how this incident came to be. I did some research. Imagine that. I actually do research for this podcast. Did some research and found an original review that I wrote for Kerrang! Magazine, issue dated November the 14th, 1987. And it was of a band from California, thrash band by the name of Lars Rocket. I'm going to spell that for you as well, Hunsy, because this is another thing we must talk about in a podcast, is spellings in rock. Because obviously I like the fact that bands never spell properly. Lars Rocket, you'll enjoy the spelling and you'll know what type of band they were. It's spelt L-A umlaut Z R-O-C-K-I-T. Lars
They've
Rocket.
gone with a double umlaut.
It's punchy, isn't it?
Not even Motorhead had double umlauts.
Punchy. So they've set themselves up there, haven't they? But unfortunately, I didn't quite take to them. So I'm going to read you this review. It'll probably take 2 or 3 minutes, but I think it's probably worth it so that you can see.
Oh, please do.
Number one, my very poor writing style in 1987. And number two, what I thought about it. Okay, so the album's called Know Your Enemy. It came out on Music for Nations. And you'll remember, Hunzi, that Kerrang used to have the immortal K rating from 1K,
Yes.
meaning total shite, to 5K, meaning indispensable. Have a guess what I gave Lars Rocket's Know Your Enemy.
Well, knowing how also editors used to work in terms of they would either they would historically mark reviews down, wouldn't they? As that journalists give it a 5, they'd mark it down to 4 because they go, oh, we can't give it a 5 for whatever reason. I'm going to assume that they probably marked yours up because you gave it 0 and they marked it up to 1.
I gave it 1K. So anyway, here's what I said on November the 14th, 1987. There are leaders and there are followers. Ain't that right? In all works of life, there are people who take the game by the scruff of the neck and shake the living daylights out of it. Then there are those who follow in the tailwind of the main men, hoping to pick up the crumbs of success which lie in their wake. It's certainly no less the case in music, and whether they know it or not, Lars Rocket are definitely followers. Don't believe what you read. Ain't that right? Lars Rocket's biography says the band are a breath of fresh air as they take their strong sense of originality to break the metal mode. Well, sorry, dears, but that's poppycock. I should have known, really. Know Your Enemy comes wrapped in the most putrid sleeve drawing ever. A gung-ho, Rambo-esque cartoon character named Crunch wreaks havoc on one of the world's battlefields. A bad idea executed in tacky fashion. The Rockets seem to expend all their energy on being loud, heavy, aggressive and obnoxious, but they never put their creative talents towards writing songs. It's when you hear a record like this that you realise that all thrash is not created equal, that Metallica, Anthrax and a select handful of others are way, way out in front of followers such as Lars Rocket. Maybe I'm starting to sound like an old fuddy-duddy, but lordy-dordy, Know Your Enemy gave me a bleeding headache when I listened to it. It's all bludgeon without much decent riffola. And when Michael Coons lets those vocals fly like it's shards of glass splintering right inside your head. Michael would probably be glad to hear that one, but to my mind, when you ain't got the songs, no matter what the style, then the aggression is just so much hot air. Songs? Nah, not really. I wouldn't call the likes of Hiroshima, Most Dangerous Game and Self-Destruct real bona fide songs. Lars Rocket are about bluff and bluster, trying to fob you off with the intensity, when what they really mean is that they don't have a great deal of idea where they're supposed to be going. They really need a rocket up the arse to teach them how to harness this thrash beast. Still, at least I know my enemy now.
You almost invited them by that last line. You almost invited them into a reaction, didn't you?
I think I did. It was a little bit harsh on them. I feel. I haven't listened to the album since. To be fair, I can't really bring myself to do that. Not even in the interest of research. But it was a tough old kick in the balls for those boys, wasn't it?
Oh, you mentioned the word punchy, and that was very punchy from you. I almost felt your ire and your rage when you were writing that. Were you just genuinely disappointed? You know how a father can be disappointed in a child. Was it when they do something that you just go, oh come on, you can do much better than that, or was it literally you just went, this is garbage?
I think B. This is garbage. I remember at the time that there were just tons of thrash bands. It was 4 years since the first Metallica album, and everybody was jumping on the thrash bandwagon. And I think the passage of time has probably proved that I'm right in so much as the punters voted with their feet, didn't they? But the really interesting part about this is, where does this end up with a T-shirt with Howard Johnson sucks dick? Well,
yes.
Well, unbeknownst to me, Lars Rocket ended up coming to the UK very shortly after this review appeared. They played on a show, which I don't know if you remember this. I do have a vague recollection of it. It was a festival called Christmas on Earth. Does that mean anything to you?
Not a jot.
It happened on December the 13th, 1987 at the Queen's Hall in Leeds. For people who are listening outside the UK, Leeds, up in the north of England. And on the bill, interesting bill actually, bottom of the bill, Virus, then Lars Rocket, then Creator, the Cro-Mags, Nuclear Assault, Overkill, and headliners Megadeth. So
Wow.
quite a big thrash bill, really. And what's funny about this is that I remember at the time someone came back from reviewing it or had been there or a fan had been there and they'd said, wow, we went there and yeah, you got called out on stage with all the members of Lars Rocket wearing these T-shirts that they'd printed up with Howard Johnson sucks dick on it, which obviously I thought was hilarious at the time and hilarious now. Again, as we were saying with Whitesnake earlier, different times, I would argue that sucking dick is a lifestyle choice. And frankly, that's absolutely fine for anybody who wants to do that. I have nothing against it. So I wouldn't necessarily call that an insult these days. I'm a happily married man. It's not for me, but for others, that's absolutely fine. You look at that now and go, oh, yeah, that's a bit awkward, isn't it? Because that's not really a great thing to say. It's a little bit homophobic, which doesn't really sit with me, but it is funny. And I found this review that was in Metal Forces magazine at the time, written by a guy called Mike Exley. And he said Michael Coons, who is the vocalist from Lars Rocket, and the lads were very genuine and the crowd really respected them for their commitment to the show. Me, I loved the personal attack on Kerrang's Howard Johnson. Whether he sucks dicks, I wouldn't know. But the T-shirts make no bones about the band's attitude to Mr. Johnson.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I wonder, I mean, I know this is a long shot, but I wonder if those T-shirts ended up in a landfill or whether they've been kept for posterity, whether the aforementioned singer has still got one. Maybe Dave Mustaine from Megadeth has got one.
What a collector's item that would be.
I mean, you've got to admire them.
I admire them for punching back. I admire them for punching back. There's nothing wrong with that. I think they may, with the benefit of hindsight, they may have chosen the wrong way to express their distaste. But what I think is really interesting is maybe we can find out what they were really thinking at the time, because I, thanks to the glories of the internet, I've done my research, and Michael Coons, I've found him. He's alive and well. I found him online.
Right, okay.
He's alive and well. He's working apparently as a bartender at the Beverly Hills Hotel.
Yeah, the cream did rise to the top, and others did not.
Exactly, but not to denigrate the work of the bartenders at the Beverly Hills Hotel. A fine, upstanding job.
I'm sure they're very good. I'm sure he's very good. Are you possibly alluding that we may contact him and have a chat with him?
Yes, absolutely. Because my mouse hand, my right mouse hand, is itching to ping that message button on Michael Coon's Facebook page and explain who we are and what we do, and that we'd love to get him on the show to talk about the Howard Johnson Sucks Dick T-shirt. Is that a good idea? I think it's a great idea.
I think it would be brilliant, because obviously me not knowing you at that time, me not knowing him at all, I would just love to get some popcorn, sit back and just listen. I think it would be brilliant.
One quick thought that sprang to mind while I was recounting that story is something that I think people have really missed over the years, is that everybody thinks that in the golden era of Kerrang, it was all this lovely little club where everyone was nice to each other and everybody loved heavy metal and nobody said anything awful about anybody, and it was all just hearts and flowers and a jolly old hoot for everybody. And I think that review really proves that there was quite a lot of negative critique in Kerrang, and I think over the years people have forgotten about that. I personally like that about the magazine, because I think a magazine, its whole raison d'etre is to give people opinions, for people to make their minds up about things. And if magazines just say everything's great because we all love heavy metal, that's not really giving the reader a service. What do you think?
I agree with you. Some of my favourite reviews over the years have always been negative reviews, because they're funny, and in a way it kind of encourages you to go and listen to it. It works both ways, doesn't it? If someone's saying this is a brilliant record because it sounds like this, or if you're a fan of this band, you'll love it, go and listen to it, right? But on the flip side, if it's like a real damning negative review, you almost want to go and find out for yourself. You want to go, if this is really bad, I need to go and listen to it myself, right? So you know for a fact, I am going to go and listen to that Lars Rocket album after this recording, and I'm just going to go and find out whether you were right or not. But I'm going to see if your vitriol was justified. I don't know whether it was Kerrang. I think you know what's coming. My two favourite negative reviews. One was, I think it was in the NME. Do you remember an album that Def Leppard did called Yeah?
I remember it well.
I think the NME review was just no. That was it. which I thought was brilliant.
Childish yet brilliant.
There's two more. A more recent one was for, when I say recent, it was probably 15 years ago. Can't remember the magazine. I think it might have been Kerrang, but it was for a new Magnum album. And it just said, can't remember what the album was called. I probably should have researched it, but I didn't because I'm not as thorough as you. It was for a new Magnum album, and it just said, if you decided after reading this review to go out and buy every single hard rock and heavy metal album ever made in the history of time, make sure you buy this one last.
Just brilliant.
I think the negative review can make you laugh. And if it makes you laugh, that's not a bad thing, is it? Because A, it's made you laugh, and B, you want to go and find out what that record is really like or what that band were really like.
Hunsey, it's been great catching up. That was a lot of fun. It's great to be doing Hojo and Hunsey's Hard Rock House, and we're looking forward to episode 3, and our single-digit listeners will be beyond themselves with excitement. We'll see you all again soon. Thanks for tuning in.
See you later.